Hi and welcome to another Java tutorial. In this video, I'm going to talk about a typical client-server application using Java. So consider the same food application and the data here basically loaded from a database, and for a client-server application, we're going to need to load the data from the database available in the server or in the remote server location. So for this example, I'm going to use XAMPP, a typical development server which consists of MySQL database server and also an Apache web server to implement the web server part. So the idea is that this application here will require to load the data from MySQL database. However, in a typical application or online application, we don't actually or directly access the MySQL database from the application, but the application will have to go through what we call as an API, and PHP is basically one of the typical API that we can use in this case. So the application here will talk to the API from the server, and then the server API then communicate or access the MySQL database and perform the SQL transaction, and then the server, the database server here will return back the result to the API, and then the API will return back the result back to the application. So this is basically usually how a typical web or a client-server application usually being implemented. So to be able to have this application, you need to install XAMPP, and then also import all the database, create a database in the localhost, create a table, and then table foods here. So you need to prepare the database, and then also you need to prepare server directory. So the server directory for XAMPP basically available in the htdoc folder. Create a folder for the application or to store the backend API. So here I created food app folder, and inside the food app folder basically contain all these PHP script files which later on used by the application. Alright, so that is basically the idea here. So how the application works. So it is basically just a very typical database CRUD operation where we allow for the application to load the data, to add data, to delete data, to update data, and also search for data. Alright, so this is basically the same example, the same project with my other Java database application, which consists of this standard interface that I built with form and buttons and also table view down here. Alright, so what's the difference here? So the difference here is that the application basically load data. So you can see the load data method here. We'll use a special request, HTTP request. So there are two types of HTTP requests that normally be used in a typical web application or client-server application, which is a get array and also another one post array. So for the load data here, I use get array, which implemented HTTP request get with the following URI to the application directory, to the web application directory, which is available through the localhost, HTTP localhost, food app, and this file here, this loadfood.php here, basically the script or the backend script, the server script that responsible to communicate with the database and then perform the load data or the select statement, SQL statement with the database. So to be able to use HTTP request, all you need to do is just import the HTTP request. So once we import the HTTP request, the loadfood.php here will return a response. So let us take a look at the loadfood script here. So the loadfood script here contain what we call as a PHP script. So PHP script, or if you don't want to use a PHP script, you can use Node.js, you can use Python, but here I use a very typical web server development, which is PHP. So for PHP, what we need to do is basically to implement what we call as a database connector. Database connector here is basically used to set up the connector object, which used to be able to connect to the MySQL database. So here we have database connect.php, which implement which set up the database parameter with the connector object. Okay, so the connector object, once we import into the to load PHP file here, script here, which allow us to connect to the database and then build our SQL query here. And here we just implement, we just select all from table food and execute the SQL query through the connector object. So once we execute the query, then we need to what we call as store the data into an array. So here is basically to the script to load the data into this food array, and then loop or traverse the data that's being retrieved from the select statement here, and put it into this food array or this list array here. And then we build this on top, or we construct what we call as a two-dimensional array by using this array push, and this will basically create that two-dimensional array for this loop. So once we collect all the data, we want to return back to the application. So we build a simple response array, and then before we submit it or before we return back, we need to format the data into what we call as a JSON data array. So for this application, we require for you to understand JSON data format, because usually whenever we are dealing with an API, the server will always return back, or usually return the data in what we call as a JSON data format, which is a standard data format that used to in web server application. So the JSON response here, this is basically where we formatted the data array here into JSON by using JSON encoder. So when we echo back, it will basically return the data as follow. So as you can see down here, so when I rerun, like for example, I rerun the application, it will load the data to get the data that's being written back from loadfood.php. Alright, so what we have from there, the JSON data will be basically assigned to the response array here. So once we receive the response array, we need to extract the data. Right, so this is basically the data that's being returned back from the response. So I print out the value here. Response code, which is 200, is a success. And then the response body is basically the JSON data. So if you want to see or if you want to understand JSON data, all you need to do is just go to the JSON editor online, copy paste the code and put the code here. So this is basically how the JSON data format is usually being represented. So you have your JSON data format as an object and also an array. So this is object, which is store value stack success, and this is another object which is store a food array, which consists of 3 data. So this is array, this is object, and this is object. And usually JSON data format is being formatted as a key, storing key value. So you have key, you have value here. Alright, but you really need to understand how JSON data format is usually being used in application. Alright, so once we have that, and we need a special library to handle JSON data, so we need JSON object library, which is available through JSON, which is available through this JSON jar library available here, and you can just put it into library and make sure that the library is properly configured into class path as this. And usually if you put it into library, Visual Studio Code will automatically put it into the project path. Alright, so once we have that ready, now the task here is to extract the data and then put it into our array list. So to extract the data, we need to get the first status object here, which is status success. The application basically return either success or fail object to indicate the operation. Like as for example, we have status success or status fail. So if the status fail, we don't want the application to process. But if the status is a success, which is status equal success, then we can continue to process or we can continue to extract the information because the data is there. Okay, the data is available, and then we can just assign or retrieve the data. So here, this is just basically the same with my previous application. So this is where we extract the data. The only difference is that we use JSON data to extract the related data. For example, we want to retrieve food object, which consists, which basically retrieve from, the data object, which basically retrieve the food array. So that's why you can see here the get JSON object and get JSON array. There are two different things. Which is get JSON object, we retrieve the data object. The data object, this is the data object. Right, so this is the data object and this is the food array. Okay, so the food array that we generate from our two-dimensional data that I've talked before. So once we have that, then we need to traverse or we need to loop our array and then extract all the information from the array. So this is all the information that we retrieve from our JSON data. And then we create or we add that to our food list object, food list array object list here. This is our array list. Okay, so just add when we every time we loop, we add that into array list. Okay, as such. Down here, this is basically just for table to refresh the table content, so that we have the data inside here. So this is for the data model for the table. All right, so that basically for loading the data. So when we first run the application, it'll basically load the data here. All right, so the rest of the operations, so like for example, to add button. So to add button basically implemented by the add food listener here. So the add food listener here, basically the same with the previous one. We get the value when we click the button. Right, so we get the value when we click the button, and then if we check all the data is not empty, and then we continue with, are you sure you want to add data? Like for example, if I want to add new data, let's say chicken burger. So price is 5 ringgit 60 cent, and description standard chicken burger. Alright, so if I press add button here, this is basically the option pane. Are you sure? Yes or no? So if it is yes, then if this is yes here, and then we perform insert food method. So the insert food method basically pass these three data that we retrieve from up here, which is insert food, and then you just go to that particular methods. So this is basically the method, right? So the method basically throw exception. Reason being is that because we use HttpRequest, it will basically require throw exception. Okay, so either you can use try and catch, or you can just throw exception to the method. So it should work. Okay, so for insert food, we were required to pass the data, right? So we need to pass all three data that we have from our form: food name, food price, and food description. And then from there, we need to create what we call as a data map. So the map object here, which basically will pass to the post array HttpRequest. So before this, I use get array. Usually when we use get array for query data, search data should be no problem for us to use get array. But if we want to modify, or we want to add data, delete data, update data, usually we will use post array, so that the data or any transaction with the database is much more secure by using post array. All right, so we wrap the data into the data object here. So now we have data object, and then the data object, and then pass to the post array together with the data, and then set the API where the script that handle insert data. So as you can see here, the file that handle insert operation handled by insert food.php. So let's see insert food.php. So in the insert food.php, it basically consists of getting the variable value from our post array. So there are three data that we pass from our application. So we pass three data. Okay, 1, 2, 3. We pass name, price, and description. So that's why our script here, okay, receive the data. Insert food here. We pass name, price, and description. Okay, name, price, and description. There are three data that we pass, and the application also pass name, price, and description. So those three data that we pass to the insert food.php. So the insert food.php will get the data and then build the SQL array, SQL statement here, insert into table food, food name, food price, food description, and this one, I forgot about the dollar there. All right, so we have these three data, food description, and then down here, this is just a normal written response. which is we build either the process is success or the process is a fail. Right, so we have all the information already. We have all the operation completed. Execute the SQL insert with the SQL query here. And then we should be able to insert data into the database. So when we press the yes button, it will basically pass to the insert food to process and insert the data into the database. So let me try to press this yes. And then once we have that, the response here is only just to retrieve the status. Okay, success or fail. We don't want to retrieve the data, all the data from database. We just want to retrieve the operation if the operation is success or if the operation is fail. So if the operation is a success, then we reload the data. We just call back load data one more time to just refresh the data in the table with the new one. So if I press yes here, it will display message display here success, and then you can see there's a new data inside here, inside this table. All right, so that basically what it does in the insert food operation. So this is also the same with the rest of the other operation like delete, update. So those are the same operation. The only difference is that, like for example, our delete food here, which handled by the delete button. So we have our delete button, this delete button listener here. So the same, if you go back to the delete food listener here. So what we have, are you sure you want to delete this food? And then delete food. Okay, so the method delete food here will delete the food based on the food ID that we selected. Okay, so we want to delete that, so we can just select that, and the current class, the current object will automatically create an object, and then we'll create that food ID is the one that we want to delete. So if we press that, another HTTP request built, and here we post, we need to create the data, and we only need to pass ID. Okay, we only need to pass ID because the ID is a unique identification. So we pass the ID, and then we use the deletefood.php backend. So if you look at the deletefood.php backend here, it's a very simple operation. We retrieve the value delete, and then build the SQL delete from table foods where ID is equal food ID, and then perform the transaction, SQL transaction, and then build the response, send the response back if it is success or if it is fail. So the same operation. So once we deleted the data, we check for the status. If it returns success, we display success message dialog, and then we reload back the data to refresh our table. That's it. So that is the idea here. So let me try to delete nasi ayam here. Delete, are you sure? Success, deleted. Okay, now we have 3 data. To update data, the same with insert, because we want to update all the data. So let's see update food listener here. So the update food listener handled by the update food listener down here. So the same with insert, but we need to get all this information to be able to update our data in the database. So we need to get the food ID, we need to get the food name, food price, and food description. So all the new data that we want to update. And then we need to make sure that the food, when we click on the inside the table, it basically create food object, and then we get the value from our text field, and then ask the user, are you sure you want to update? If user sure they want to update, then we create update food method down here, pass all the required data, pass. And then we create an object, but in this case we need to create we need to pass together with the ID, because we want to update based on the update. We don't want to create new data. The new data will create when we create new data, the ID will automatically create it. But here we wanted to update the data. So to update the data, we need the ID. So that's why we pass ID to this particular method. And the same, Here, because we are doing database transaction, we want to change something. So we use post array, pass the data, create the URI, and then here we use update food.php. So for the update food.php here, so this is basically almost similar with insert. So we need to get all the variable, all the data from our post array, ID, name, price, and description. And then we build our SQL, update table food and whatnot. So those are the SQL statement for update. And then perform the query and then return back if the operation is a success or if the operation is a fail. So if it is a success, then we should be able to we will display our show message dialog and then reload the data again. Okay, so that basically the logic that implemented here. So let's say I want to update. This one is chicken rice. So yellow, or we just call it chicken rice with soup. And this one is chicken rice. And change the price to, let's say, 7 ringgit. Right? So we want to update, press update. Update the nasi ayam before. Yes. Success. And then press OK. It will basically reload I've deleted the data. So the data is not there. I need to click on the right data here, so sorry for that. So let me try to update nasi lemak sambal, or maybe mee goreng here. Right, so this is called should be called fried rice. I want to change the price. Let's say 5 ringgit 50 cent. Right, so I want to update. Yes, press OK. Now you can see fried rice. Sorry, it's not fried rice, fried mee. Okay, so update that, press that, press OK. Now you can see the data successfully updated into the database. All right, so now the last part here is basically to search. Okay, so the search operation basically implemented through the search food listener here. So the search food listener will pop up a show input dialog and ask user for the food name. Right, so and then assign to search variable and then pass to this search food method which is available down here. So since this is a simple search operation, so we use get array. So we pass the data, or we construct the URI by using this standard get request. So it's basically handled by searchfoods.php, and then we construct the passing parameter for get array to pass the search value, and then return for the response by the server. And this is basically the same. This is basically the same with load data. Okay, because we are loading the data, but the difference here is that we want to load based on a special query. And then in this case, I purposely separate each of the operations into separate file so that it's much easier to understand. And here, the only difference that you have from load data is this. A special SQL statement, these two, which basically use the food name for select statement. Select all from table food, where food name like statement. Right, so the like statement will return based on the this query, like anything that we or the user would like to search for. Okay, so we have those based on query, but the rest basically the same with load food. You can see there, all the same. The only difference is that based on this query here, it's very different. This one load everything, but this one load based on query. So what happened with that? Basically the same. All right, so we retrieve all the data, pass the data into our food list array list, and then refresh our table. It's basically the same. So For example, if I wanted to search for, let's say just me, okay, press OK. Now you can see that it only returned me, okay, fried me. So search again. If you didn't enter anything, it will return everything, right? So you want to search for egg only, press OK. So all with egg. Search, it didn't return anything. Let me just put just that one is food description, not food name. So let me just put it lem, which is for lemak. There, lemak only. But if you want to include search also for food description, then you can just add that into your query. But that one is up to you, based on what type of query that you like to search for. But here, just a very simple query that based on food name. So if you want to add for food description, you can add food description based on the query. Alright, so yeah, but one more thing that I forgot to mention, to be able to use the HTTP request, okay, because the HTTP request only available in, I believe, in Java. Let me just close this. Java version. So only available Java version, JDK version 11 and above. Okay, so you don't have to import any special library to be able to use HTTP request. So it comes pre-bundled with Java. All right, so there's a one method that I forgot to show. That one will be required for post array only. The post array will require this array builder, this build data map here. Okay, so this is a special build from data map to be able to use build from data map method here down here. You can see that it's basically referring to this build from data from map. Okay, so just to build that and pass the data into our post array. For get array, you have to build that your own, but for post array, you will be required this special method here to build and pass back to the post array. All right, so very simple client server based application by using Java. The link, the codes and everything all in the description. That basically you can refer to, and even together with the JSON object here, the JSON library here, it's already there. But if you want to use the latest version, you need to look for the library, because I didn't use any Maven, Gradle and whatnot when I create the application. I just use command palette here, create Java project here, and then with no build tool. If you choose to build the application by using Maven, Gradle, Spring, or any other build tool, then you need to refer to the selected build tool how to import your library. Okay, but here is very bare bone Java application. So very simple. I didn't create any external classes and whatnot. So those are very what we call it. I can call it as spaghetti. Okay, it's all inside here, but it's very simple to understand. Should be very simple to understand. As long as you understand how Java works. Okay, so you have all the block for let's say for this method here, main interface, this block here for the load data method, and then the throw exception here, because I didn't put it inside the method throw try and catch, so I need to throw exception. It will throw exception through the load data. Okay, and because this one's already throw exception, so it should be no problem for the main method. Understanding that, you need to understand Java, how Java application works to be able to understand the code, because I'm not teaching that. I'm not sharing on that. Okay, the fundamental of Java. Here, this is basically just a description how Java application can work with a client-server application by using PHP as a backend and also MySQL database as a database. So now you can create or you can develop Java application, and you can publish your database anywhere in a web hosting, and then the application, your Java application, should be able to access the database remotely by using an API, without having to directly open your MySQL database, and that basically pose a security issue to your server. Okay, so I hope that should benefit you in some way, to be able to use Java application and also communicate the Java application with your database and also with your with your server. And see you next tutorial. Bye bye.